You know, when most people look at a tree, they see something rooted in the ground, and they assume quite naturally that the ground must be feeding it in the most literal sense. It seems obvious. The roots go down into the soil, so the soil must be where the tree gets most of what it is made of. That feels so intuitive that we rarely question it. But intuition, as it often does in science, quietly misleads us. Imagine planting a small sapling in a large pot filled with carefully measured soil. You water it, give it sunlight, and let it grow for years. Eventually, that sapling becomes a substantial young tree, thick trunk, spreading branches, hundreds of leaves. Now here's the curious part. If you remove the tree and weigh the soil again, you might expect it to be dramatically lighter, as if the tree had eaten a large portion of it. But the soil's weight barely changes. The tree gained enormous mass, yet the ground lost almost none. So where did all that material come from? This is the moment where our everyday thinking begins to crack. We are used to the idea that growth means consumption, that something gets bigger by taking in solid stuff from its surroundings. Animals eat food, buildings are made from bricks, a pile grows when you add more to it. The human mind loves visible transfers of matter. We trust what we can see moving from one place to another. But trees challenge this habit of thought. The soil does play a role, of course. It provides minerals, tiny amounts of essential elements. It anchors the tree. It stores water. It's supportive, stabilizing, and necessary, but it is not the primary substance from which the tree is built. The vast wooden body rising into the air does not come from the ground in the way we instinctively imagine. The real surprise is not just scientific, it's psychological. We assume that what is solid must come from something solid. We believe that what is large must have grown by taking in something equally substantial. Yet here stands a towering organism that seems to contradict that expectation completely. It forces us to confront a deeper truth. Reality is not obligated to match human intuition. What feels obvious is often just familiarity wearing the mask of understanding. When we say a tree grows from the ground, we are really describing what we see, not what actually happens. Our language reflects our perception, not the deeper mechanisms of nature, and this gap between appearance and reality is where scientific insight begins. The roots are not mouths devouring earth. The soil is not the body of the tree waiting to be rearranged. Growth, in this case, is something far more subtle, far more astonishing, and far less visible than simple absorption. And once you truly accept that, once you realize that something as massive as a tree is not primarily built from the ground beneath it, you begin to sense that the world is far stranger, far more elegant, and far more mysterious than everyday thinking allows. What you see is not always what is happening. And understanding begins the moment you stop trusting what merely looks obvious. Now, if the soil is not the main source of a tree's substance, then we are left with a far more unsettling question. Where does all that solid material actually come from? A tree is not a small thing. It is heavy, dense, and structured. You can touch it, cut it, build with it, burn it. It feels unquestionably solid. And yet, the true source of that solidity is something most people never suspect, because it surrounds us constantly, silently, invisibly. The bulk of a tree's mass comes from the air. That sounds almost absurd at first. Air feels like nothing. You wave your hand through it without resistance. You breathe it without noticing its weight. It does not seem like the kind of thing that could ever become wood, something rigid, textured, and enduring. But this reaction reveals something interesting about how the human mind works. We confuse visibility with importance. If we cannot see something accumulate, we struggle to imagine it building anything substantial, but air is not empty. It contains carbon dioxide, molecules made of carbon and oxygen drifting freely all around us. And carbon, it turns out, is the structural backbone of life. The trunk of a tree, its branches, its fibers all are built primarily from carbon-based compounds. The tree is, quite literally, assembling its body from carbon atoms that once floated freely in the atmosphere. Through photosynthesis, leaves capture carbon dioxide and rearrange its atoms into sugars. Those sugars are then transformed into cellulose, lignin, and all the other materials that give wood its strength and form. Over time, layer upon layer, molecule upon molecule, the tree constructs itself, not by gathering chunks of matter you can see, but by capturing a gas you rarely notice. This changes the way you look at growth. The tree is not just standing in the air, it is slowly turning air into structure. The invisible becomes visible, the intangible becomes solid. What once drifted freely in the sky becomes the very substance you can knock on with your knuckles. In the spirit of scientific curiosity that thinkers like Richard Feynman embodied so well, the wonder here is not just in the explanation, but in how deeply it reshapes our perception. We tend to believe that transformation requires dramatic movement, something obvious, mechanical, forceful. But here the transformation is quiet, continuous, almost invisible. A tree is not built with noise or motion you can easily detect. It is assembled atom by atom, patiently, persistently, from something we barely acknowledge exists. And psychologically, this is deeply humbling. It reveals how much of reality unfolds beyond the limits of our senses. We live surrounded by processes of immense scale and consequence that never announce themselves. The world is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we are naturally equipped to notice. A tree, then, is not merely growing upward. It is capturing fragments of the sky and locking them into form. It is building solidity out of invisibility, permanence out of what once drifted freely. And if something as massive as a tree can be built from what we cannot even see, then perhaps the greatest forces shaping reality are not the ones that demand our attention, but the ones we overlook every single day. And even after we understand that a tree builds its body from carbon in the air, another question immediately appears, and it is just as profound. Rearranging atoms is not effortless. Matter does not simply reorganize itself into complex structure for free. Something must drive the transformation. Something must power the conversion of invisible gas into solid wood, fiber, and form. That driving force is sunlight. Now this is where the story becomes even more remarkable, because we are no longer talking simply about matter. We are talking about energy shaping matter. A tree is not just collecting ingredients. It is performing an ongoing act of construction powered by light streaming across space from a distant star. When sunlight reaches a leaf, it does not merely warm it. The leaf is designed at the molecular level to capture that light and use its energy to rearrange atoms. Carbon dioxide from the air and water drawn up from the roots are chemically stable. Left alone, they would remain exactly as they are. But sunlight provides the push, the energetic nudge that allows bonds to break and new ones to form. With that energy, the tree builds sugar molecules, and from those sugars, it constructs cellulose, the structural framework of wood, along with countless other compounds that give the tree its strength and shape. So when you look at a tree trunk, you are not just seeing stored matter, you are seeing stored sunlight. That idea is almost poetic, but it is also literally true. The energy that once traveled across millions of kilometers of empty space becomes trapped inside chemical bonds, locked into the architecture of living tissue. The rigid solidity of wood is, in a very real sense, sunlight slowed down and held in place, and here again our intuition struggles. We think of light as fleeting, something that illuminates, warms, then disappears. We do not think of it as something that can become structure, but nature has no such limitation. Energy flows into matter, reshapes it, stabilizes it, and remains hidden within it. The tree is not merely standing in sunlight. It is capturing light and transforming it into form that can persist for decades, even centuries. This reveals something deeply philosophical about growth itself. Nothing truly builds without energy. Structure is not just a matter of assembling pieces. It is the result of energy being guided, channeled, and stored. Order in the universe does not appear spontaneously. It is paid for, moment by moment, with energy. And what's fascinating is how quietly this happens. No noise, no visible machinery, no dramatic motion. Day after day, leaf after leaf, light is absorbed, atoms are rearranged, and the tree slowly thickens, rises, expands. A silent accumulation of energy turned into form. It challenges the way we think about power. We often associate power with force, speed, or intensity, but the tree reveals a different kind of power, steady, patient, persistent. A gentle rain of light, captured consistently over time, becomes a towering structure that can outlive generations. And once you truly see this, the tree is no longer just an organism growing upward. It becomes a monument to energy, transformed proof that light, when patiently captured, can become substance, strength, and permanence. If sunlight can become wood through quiet, continuous transformation, then perhaps the greatest changes in life are not driven by bursts of force, but by the steady energy we choose to capture and build with every single day. And when you step back and look at everything together, the soil that barely contributes mass, the air quietly supplying carbon, the sunlight providing energy, a deeper realization begins to emerge. A tree does not grow by simply taking things in and piling them up. Its growth is something far more subtle, far more profound. It is a transformation. We often imagine growth as accumulation. You add material, and something becomes bigger. That's how we build houses. That's how we gain weight. That's how we stack objects. Our everyday experience teaches us that size comes from gathering more stuff. But a tree does not follow that simple story. It does not just collect matter, it reorganizes it, reshapes it, gives it new identity. The atoms that form a tree's trunk were once part of the atmosphere, drifting without structure or purpose. The energy that binds those atoms into solid form once traveled freely as light across space. The water moving through its tissues was once vapor, cloud, or rain. Nothing about a tree's substance begins as tree. Everything is transformed into it. This is the real meaning of growth in the natural world. Not accumulation, transformation. Matter is borrowed, rearranged, stabilized, and given temporary form. What appears solid and permanent is actually a momentary pattern in an ongoing flow of energy and particles. In the spirit of curiosity that defined thinkers like Richard Feynman, the wonder is not just that this happens, but that it happens continuously, everywhere, without pause. Nature is not a warehouse storing materials. It is a process, dynamic, restless, endlessly reshaping what already exists into new forms. And psychologically, this challenges something deep in how we understand reality. We crave stability. We like to believe that solid things are truly solid, that what we see is fixed and self-contained. But the tree standing before you is not a static object. It is a living process, a temporary organization of matter passing through time. Even the word tree is, in a sense, a convenient illusion. What we call a tree is really a pattern of transformation held together long enough for us to recognize it. The atoms will not stay there forever. The stored sunlight will eventually be released. The structure will break down, disperse, and become something else. Growth and decay are not opposites, they are phases of the same continuous rearrangement. And once you understand this, the tree becomes more than a biological organism. It becomes a visible demonstration of how reality itself operates. Nothing simply is. Everything is becoming. Everything is being reshaped by flows of energy and matter moving through time. The tree does not grow from the ground. It grows from transformation itself, from the constant reorganization of the universe into temporary forms of astonishing complexity. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: if nature builds greatness not by gathering more, but by transforming what already exists, then real growth in our own lives may not come from accumulation, but from transformation.